A very good morning, children. Welcome to today's class. Today, we'll read the chapter 1 of your supplementary reader. The name of the chapter is Triumph of Surgery, written by James Herriot. Triumph means victory, and surgery. Surgery, as you all know, is a medical treatment when it's used as a verb. But here, surgery is the clinic of the veterinary doctor. So let's come to the short introduction of the chapter. It's a story about Tricky, a dog who is the pet of a rich lady named Mrs. Pumphrey. She loves her dog very much and is unable to refuse him anything he wants. Tricky is fond of eating cream cakes and chocolates. So one day when Mrs. Pumphrey is out with Tricky for the walk, the narrator, that is the James Herriot, is a veterinary surgeon, sees them and stops to talk. While talking to Mrs. Pumphrey, he realizes that she's been overfeeding Tricky and also had been giving him things that he shouldn't eat, due to which Tricky had started looking like a bloated sausage. Soon Tricky got unwell and Mrs. Pumphrey has to call Mr. Herriot for help. She does not want to send him away, but the only way suggested by Mr. Herriot is to get him hospitalized for 15 days. And then the story unfolds into how he gets well. Now let's come to the line-by-line explanation of the chapter. I was really worried about Tricky this time. I had pulled up my car when I saw him in the street with his mistress, and I was shocked at his appearance. Now here, the narrator explains that when he saw Tricky this time, he was really shocked to see his appearance. He had become hugely fat, like a bloated sausage with a leg at each corner. He has become extremely fat. His eyes bloodshot and rheumy. Bloodshot means they looked very tired and red, and rheumy means a watery discharge was coming out of his eyes. Stared straight ahead, and his tongue lolled from his jaws, and his tongue was coming out from his jaws. Mrs. Pumphrey hastened to explain. Hurriedly she explained, he was so listless. Listless means lacking energy and tired. Mr. Herriot, he seemed to have no energy. I thought he must be suffering from malnutrition. See, although the dog was too fat, but the lady thought that he was suffering from malnutrition. So I have been giving him some little extras between meals to build him up. Some malt and cod liver oil and a bowl of Horlicks at night to make him sleep. Nothing much really. Adding on to his diet, then also she felt that she was not giving him much. She was actually over-pampering. That over-love for that dog has made him so listless. And did you cut down on the sweet things as I told you? Now the doctor asked her. Has she cut down on the sweet things? Oh, I did for a bit, but he seemed to be so weak. I had to relent. He does love cream cakes and chocolate, so I can't bear to refuse him. She said she tried, but she found that the dog was so weak and she could not stop that. So she started giving him all whatever he wanted again. I looked down at the little dog. That was the trouble. Tricky's only fault was greed. Now Tricky, in spite of being unwell, would not say no to food. He had never been known to refuse food. He would tackle a meal at any hour of the day or night, and I wondered about all the things Mrs. Pumphrey hadn't mentioned. The doctor knew that these were the only few things she is mentioning. Besides these, she was giving him over meals. Are you giving him plenty of exercise? Well, he has his little walks with me, as you can see. But Hodkin, the gardener, has been down with lumbago, as there has been no ring throwing lately. She said yes, only these little walks. Earlier, her gardener, Mr. Hodkin, used to give ring throwing exercises, but now he was down with lumbago. Lumbago means back pain. I tried to sound severe. Now I really mean this. If you don't cut his foot right down and give him more exercise, he is going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet. Now, this time the doctor had to be strict and he said, you have to cut his foot and give him some exercise. Otherwise, he is going to be ill. Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet. I'm sure you're right. But it is so difficult, so very difficult. She set off, head down, along the road, as if determined to put the new regime into practice immediately. She showed as if she is going to follow the doctor's instruction. I watched their progress with growing concern. Tricky was tottering along in his little tweed coat. Now, that little dog was going, and the writer was watching both of them go. He was really concerned, being a vet, about Tricky, but he found that he was going very tiredly in his little tweed coat. The dog was wearing a tweed coat. He had a whole wardrobe of these coats for the cold weather and a raincoat for the wet days. He struggled on, drooping in his harness. Harness is the set of straps that is used to tie an animal, and he was not able to walk properly. I thought it would be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. Now, these all things show that Mrs. Pumphrey was over-concerned and protective about her pet. She was providing clothes to the animals, which actually they don't need. She was giving him over meals, Horlicks, what not she was providing. Now, the next day, as it was thought that Mrs. Pumphrey is going to call the vet because Tricky was really not well, the expected call came within a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. Distraught means worried and upset. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favorite dishes, and besides, he had bouts of vomiting. He spent all his time lying on a rug, panting, didn't want to go for walks, didn't want to do anything. Actually, the dog was really ill now due to overeating. I had made my plans in advance. The only way was to get Tricky out of the house for a period. I suggested that he be hospitalized for about a fortnight to be kept under observation. The poor lady almost swooned. Swoon means almost fainted, because she was not prepared for that. She didn't want to part away from her pet. She was sure he would pine and die if he did not see her every day. Now she was under an illusion that if her pet wouldn't see her, it is really going to die. But I took a firm line. Tricky was very ill, and this was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it best to take him without delay, and followed by Mrs. Pumphrey's wailings. Wailings means crying, sobbing. I marched out to the car, carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. The entire staff was roused, and maids rushed in and out, bringing his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions, toys, rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl. Now all the belongings which Mrs. Pumphrey has provided for that little dog were brought because it was leaving for the hospital. Realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. The doctor knew that all this stuff is not going to be put in the car, so he started to drive. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats through the window. Now she threw few coats into the car. I looked in the mirror. Before I turned the corner of the drive, everybody was in tears. Now everybody there was crying. Out on the road, I glanced down at the pathetic little animal gasping on the seat by my side. I patted the head, and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. Poor old lad, I said, you haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you. The doctor knew how that little dog was to be treated. At the surgery, the household dogs surged round me. Surge means they started moving round the doctor. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack. Pack is the collective noun for dogs. with dull eyes, and when put down, lay motionless on the carpet. Now Tricky was very lethargic, motionless, could not move. The other dogs, after sniffing round him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. When the other dogs found that the dog was uninteresting and would not play with him, they just started ignoring him. I made up a bed for him in a warm, loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. Now he made the arrangement like the other dogs. No special treatment was given to him as he was provided all the special treatment at Mrs. Pumphrey's house. For 2 days I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. See, whenever we are ill, or generally also, doctors tell us to drink a lot of plain water because water drives away all the toxins from the body. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the third, he began to whimper and when he heard the dogs in the yard. Now he started responding towards his surroundings. He started becoming active. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound, and his friends. Now, when the doctor opened the door, he found that Tricky was coming out with Joe. Joe was a greyhound breed dog, and the other dogs also. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. Now Tricky started playing with the other dogs. Although he had surplus fat, but he started moving. Later that day, I was present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the bowls. Tristan was the servant of the veterinary doctor, and he served the food to all the dogs. There was a usual headlong rush followed by the sounds of high-speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. Now soon, the dogs started eating. When they had finished, Tricky took a walk around the shining bowls, licking casually inside one or two of them. Now, Tricky started showing the normal behavior of the dogs. Next day, an extra bowl was put out for him, and I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards them. Now, jostling means he started making his way towards the bowls. From then on, his progress was rapid. Now, from that day, he started improving very fast. He had no medicinal treatment of any kind, but all day he ran about with the dogs, joining in their friendly scrimmages. Scrimmages means whatever they were playing, the confused kind of a struggle and other things which generally the dogs do. He discovered the joys of being bowled over, tramped on, and squashed every few minutes. Now, you see that despite of getting proper meals, he was also going for exercises. He was not lethargic anymore. He became an accepted member of the gang, an unlikely silky little object among the shaggy crew. Shaggy means dogs with long, thick hair, and he was a soft little dog, shiny among them, fighting like a tiger for his share at mealtimes and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. He had never had such a time in his life. Earlier, he had a very luxurious life, sitting, doing nothing, having everything. This way, Mrs. Pumphrey was actually spoiling him, and it was affecting his personality. Same happens with us also. Sometimes the parents are overprotected towards their children, and they don't let them do the normal things which they should do at this age. They lack exercises. They're lying on the bed the whole day, getting meals there, doing the work there only. This actually affects the personality development of a child. All the while, Mrs. Pumphrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. Now, Mrs. Pumphrey used to call every now and then at the surgery to know what was the latest news about her pet. I dodged the questions about whether his cushions were being turned regularly or correct coat worn according to the weather, but I was able to tell her that little fellow was out of danger and convulsing rapidly. Now she would ask, have you changed his cushions or have you provided him with the correct coat? Doctor would not answer such questions. He would only tell her about the physical progress and told her that the dog is out of danger now and is actually recovering. Convulsing means recovering rapidly. The word convulsing seemed to do something to Mrs. Pumphrey. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozens at a time, to build up Tricky's strength. For a happy period, my partners and I had 2 eggs each for breakfast, but when the bottles of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household. Now she thought, when the doctor said that he is recovering, she thought that might be the dog is weak. She started sending extra 2 dozens of eggs along with the wine. Now the doctor was started enjoying those things with his partners, with his workers at the surgery. It was to enrich Ricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with 2 glasses of wine before and several during the meal. Now these all things were not required by the dog. He was already too heavy. So he was given a balanced meal these days. But all these things were kept on enjoyed by the doctor and his staff. So the lunch became a ceremonial occasion, and 2 glasses of wine before and after the meals were being served. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution. For a few nights the fine spirits were rolled round, inhaled, and reverently drunk. They were the days of deep content, starting well with the extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained by the midday wine, and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. Now the writer says that after a few days, she even started sending brandy for her dog. Now all these things were actually enjoyed by the doctor, James Heriot, and his staff. So they had a nice time when they had extra egg in the morning. Then midday they had wine, and at night they had brandy. Now they felt it was a temptation to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest. But I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering, and after a fortnight felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. But he knew that this was really wrong, and Mrs. Pumphrey was actually suffering because she was away from her beloved pet. And after a fortnight, after 15 days, he felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog was fine and she can come and take her pet back. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. Now, as soon as the doctor called Mrs. Pumphrey, a 30 feet of black car came outside the surgery. The chauffeur, means the driver, opened the door, and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey, almost lost in the interior. She was so weak now that she was almost lost in the interior of the car. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled. This all shows that she was quite very nervous. "Oh, Mr. Heriot, do tell me the truth. Is he really better?" Now she wanted to know the real condition of her dog. "Yes, he's fine. There's no need for you to get out of the car. I'll go and fetch him." The doctor said that you don't need to come out. I'll just bring the dog. I walked through the house into the garden. A mass of dogs was hurling round and round the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving, was the little golden figure of Tricky. Now see the contrast. In the beginning when Tricky came, it was very listless and didn't want to move. Now here it was flapping, tail waving, and running around, enjoying his life. In 2 weeks he had been transformed into a lithe, hard-muscled animal. Lithe means fit. He was keeping up well with the pack. With pack means the group of dogs, stretching out in great bounds, his chest almost brushing the ground. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open, and when Tricky saw his mistress, He took off from my arms in a tremendous leap and sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. She gave a startled "Oh!" then had to defend herself as he swarmed over her, licking her face and barking. Now, as soon as Tricky saw her owner, he was overwhelmed and started licking the owner just to show his love towards her and started barking excitingly. During the excitement, I helped the chauffeur to bring out the beds, toys, cushions, coats, and bowls, none of which had been used. Now, all the belongings of Tricky were returned, and none of them was used in these 15 days. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out of the window. Tears shone in her eyes, her lips trembled. Now she was filled with gratitude towards the doctor. "Oh, Mr. Heriot," she cried, "how can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery." Now she was so thankful to the doctor, she said that this was the victory of the treatment he has given. And although no treatment was given, no medicines were given, no surgery was conducted, it was all that he was brought to the normal environment which was essential for that little dog. Now, coming to the theme of the story. The theme of the story is about the blind love which we possess for the one whom we love the most. Mrs. Pumphrey had no idea that her blind and extreme love for her dog Tricky took him to trouble. Excessive love made Tricky sick and became a reason for his illness. Excess of everything is bad. Even the parents who over-pamper their children lead them to destruction only, both physically as well as mentally. The story is about the problems of comfortable living or cushioned living. Often parents pamper their child so much that they lose the drive of adventure and become too comfortable and overly protective. This not only causes underdevelopment of personality but always has a negative physical and psychological impact. So, what we learn from this story is that we should eat in a limit. Then we need to exercise also. Excess of everything is bad. When excess of eating is also bad. Excess of resting is also bad. I hope you have understood the chapter now. Your comments will be welcome.